Hello, my name is Thomas Stewart, and I am a console porting expert. Not really, but I have ported 12 titles across 6 different platforms, so I know a thing or two about what it means to develop a video game and put it on different consoles. So I've launched 12 titles on 6 different consoles completely single-handedly, learning how to do everything myself, establishing a business identity, acquiring a static IP address, applying for all of these developer programs, getting all the dev kits, setting up all the hardware, reading all of the documentation, filling out support tickets, incorporating all of the different SDKs into my projects, getting my games to run on each different system, rummaging through dozens of different backend dashboards, setting up the content for store pages, dealing with things like age ratings and localization and QA testing and build pipelines and pricing models. And I've done this twice on Steam and then 10 other times on all different console platforms. So these platforms that I'm talking about are 6 unique systems that you're familiar with, Steam and Xbox and PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5, which are actually very separate from each other and have a whole different process. ATARI VCS, and then lastly Nintendo Switch, which my first game on Nintendo Switch should be releasing fairly soon. And let me tell you, it's a lot of work, but is it worth it? And that's the question that I want to talk about. I'll give you the short answer first. Yes, I think that it is worth it, because the majority of my revenue has come from game sales on console platforms. If I only had my game sale revenue from my Steam launches, then I would have way less money. But the fact that I have consistent income dripping in from 6 distinct platforms gives me hope that I'll be able to continue doing this full time. Okay, so that's the short version, but let me give you the long version. I already told you that console porting is a difficult thing to do, especially as a solo indie developer, but difficulty isn't the only factor. It also takes a huge amount of time. Now, I'd like to think I'm actually getting pretty good at the process. There are some consoles that I've launched 3 different titles on now, so I'm kind of getting the cadence of things and getting familiar with how everything works. But even then, it takes a lot of time. Now, it's hard to measure exactly what the time effort is on these because I'm always working on multiple projects concurrently, but the time period that I spent developing both tanks but no tanks and bridges and docks is comparable to the amount of time that I spent porting to consoles. So it's almost a 1-to-1 as far as it comes to time commitment. So I have to think to myself, would I have been better off this past year if I had ignored consoles and instead been able to release 2 more games onto Steam? Probably not, but maybe. But when I'm talking about whether or not porting to consoles is actually worth it, I think there's an intangible benefit. Seeing my own games on each different platform fills me with an immense amount of satisfaction. It makes me feel like a more legitimate game developer instead of just a hobbyist. Like if I could go back in time and show my 10-year-old self that I had released games that I had developed all by myself on Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo, I think that the younger version of me would think that the current version of me is super cool. Oh, young and naive Thomas. Not only that, but it has legitimized my work in the eyes of potential publishers and employers. It has expanded my skill set so that I'm actually much more employable if I'm looking for contract work or trying to publish a game because I know the ins and outs and intricacies of what it takes to bring a game onto consoles. I've had conversations with publishers and game studios that are willing to pay me for my expertise, which makes me feel a lot better about being able to earn money if I have to return to the workforce. But hopefully that won't happen, knock on wood. But I will say this. The shininess wears off after a while. Like once you've done this the 3rd time around, it becomes a bit more monotonous. Filling out pages and pages of localized game descriptions just isn't as fun as it used to be, and it can feel mundane and like pure drudgery sometimes. Failing a certification process can just take you out at the knees and make you wish that you could just start on the next project already. And more than a few times, I have checked my analytics on launch day and been disappointed with the results. So even though I'm making games, it's not all fun and games. So yeah, that's kind of the long version of it. Yes, I think that it has been worth it, but going forward, I might be more selective over which consoles I port my games to in the future. Because now I have enough data to go off of which ones are hardest to port to and which ones make the most money, at least for my games. It's not consistent over the different titles that I've launched, but some are trending higher than others for sure. So I know that a lot of people that watch this channel are game developers or aspiring game developers. So you might be asking yourself, well, could I port my games to consoles? And I think that's a great question to be asking. And let me give you my opinion of who is best fit to be able to single-handedly port their own games to consoles. Number one, if you are comfortable programming. There's a lot of proprietary SDKs and you have to tie into different platforms' accounts and how to figure out how to do the save systems and all of that stuff. There's actually a lot of good documentation depending on the platform, and a lot of times you will actually have a code snippet that you can just copy and paste and just tweak it a little bit so that it fits into your game better. But I think that there is a big hurdle for people who aren't super comfortable in code. Having a background and comfortability in code I think helps a lot. Number two, if you have a lot of time. Now, I won't beat a dead horse here, but I will say it takes a lot of time to figure out how all this stuff works. Be prepared to read a lot of documentation and put your head down and just try and trudge through all of the confusion. Number three, if you have some extra money, because believe it or not, some platforms, when you sign up for their developer programs, they will gift you a developer kit. Other platforms will not gift you a developer kit, and you have to buy them out of your own pocket. This can be in the hundreds or thousands of dollars. I don't think I'm allowed to disclose, but it's like a good chunk of change. So if you are not anticipating that, you might be very sorry. So if you plan on pursuing console porting, just be aware that you might have to shell out some cash in order to get your hands on a dev kit. And dev kits are vital because you have to be able to test your game on the actual hardware to make sure that everything's working properly. Number four, if your game is relatively simple. Porting gets a lot more complicated if you have things like online multiplayer or a lot of content. I can port my small games in a matter of days or weeks, but for bigger games, it'll easily take numerous months. And number five, and this one might be controversial, but if you use Unity. I hate to say it, but after going through each ecosystem for each platform, it's abundantly clear that Unity is a crowd favorite. Now, it's definitely possible to port a game to consoles that's made in Godot or Unreal Engine or Game Maker or your own custom engine, but the documentation speaks for itself. Out of all the documentation that I read, Unity is definitely highlighted above all the other game engines. I didn't even see a mention for a lot of these other game engines. Unity is definitely the one that is highlighted the most when it comes to documentation. So if you use Unity, then your job will probably be a lot easier than using anything else. So those are some of my thoughts around my console porting experience. It's not a no-brainer, but I'm glad to have done it. If you want to check out any of my games, I will leave links below to all the different platforms and you can check it out. Thanks for sticking around, blah, blah, blah. See you in the next one.